You're right. And fat is part of what we call the connective tissue. All right. So I mean, you guys probably know this, but you probably, especially if you like, you know, somebody who care about their skin and stuff like that, right? You want to be young, right? People buy creams and this product, that product, and you know, they put it on at night and all that stuff, so that way it keep their skin like young and fresh and all that stuff. And that's what we're gonna focus on today. And all those things has to do with connective tissue, collagen, fibers, and all that stuff. So again, right? Visual image. This is your epithelial tissue. This is probably columnar, right? Because it looks like a column. And again, their basal region, like the bottom of the epithelial tissue, are always connected to the connective tissue. And today we're going to focus on the connective tissue because both of them, they go along with each other. All right. So what are the functions of connective tissue? Well, these things, they establish structural framework for the body, right? Because they they kind of like connect things together. They transport fluid, all right? They protect delicate organs. They support and surround, just kind of like epithelial tissue, but epithelial tissue have more of that job. They store energy reserve, like fat, defending the body from invading microorganisms. So those are some of the characteristics, the jobs of a connective tissue. Connective tissue are divided into three classification, three category. All right, just kind of like epithelial tissue, right? They divided by the symbol, or stratify, or are they cuboidal, squamous, or columnar, right? So your connective tissue are divided into three categories, right? So everything about connective tissue today going to be involved these three categories. The first category is what we call connective tissue proper. Right? This is the most of your connective tissue are part of this category. Its job is to connect and protect. And then the second type of connective tissue that we're going to talk about today is called fluid connective tissue. When we talk about fluid connective tissue, think of transport, think of blood. Blood is part of your fluid connective tissue. Right? Because sometimes we think tissue has to be like something hard, physical, but no, it can be fluidy, like blood. And then the last type of connective tissue is called supporting connective tissue. These are connective tissue that involve with structural strength, like bone. Bone is part of your supporting connective tissue. As you can see, connective tissue technically make the majority part of our body. So we're gonna focus on the first category, which is connective tissue proper. So that's the first category. And again, I said majority of the connective tissue in your body has to do with connective tissue proper. This category are then divided into two smaller categories. One is called loose connective tissue, and the other one is called dense connective tissue. Loose connective tissue, like your fat, is an example of loose connective tissue. That means these cells, they don't tightly pack together. They kind of like connect each other, but like loosely, like fat. Think of fat when you think of loose connective tissue. And then you also have dense connective tissue, which is like your tendons. If you guys still remember, your tendon connect your muscle to your bone, and that'll be your tendon. Your tendon. It's dense because they tightly connect to each other. Okay. So again, this is only the first category of connective tissue. Okay. And they include loose and dense. All right. Before we talk about connective tissue, let's talk about the cells that make up the connective tissue. Remember, tissue is a combination of cells, right? Of cells. So these are the cells that make up the connective tissue. Okay. Fibroblast, fibrocyte, adipocyte, mesenchymal cell. You guys still remember this from your stem cell article? Macrophage, mast cell, lymphocyte, microphage, melanocyte. Sound familiar, right? So all these cells packed together to make up your connective tissue. And one example of your connective tissue is tissue proper. Okay. Anyway, so again, just to help you visualize this, these are cells that come together to make up the connective tissue. Right. What are the cells? Well, let's go over some of the main one and then some of the not important one. So the top two one that we will focus on is fibroblast. From your root words, if you remember, and your vocab list, fibroblast is the most abundant cell type that make up your connective tissue. If you look at the picture here, fibroblast will be these things. Okay, what is that? Oh no, it'll be the purple thing here. What are fibroblasts? Its job is to secrete protein, okay, and hyaluronin, which is cell cement. So its job is try kind of like cement all these cells together, holding all these cells together. So that's why they're the most abundant. It's called fibroblast. And then you have fibrocyte, which is the second most abundant. Their job is to make sure that your connective tissue have fibers, right? Fibrocyte would be you don't see here, but anyway, their job is to cyte means cell. This is the cell that produce fibers, that produce your connective tissue with fibers, so that way it continues to be strong. Okay, so these are the top two. And then you also have adipocyte, which is fat cells, adipose fat. That's also part of the connective tissue. Mesenchymal cell or stem cell that can become any type of the connective tissue cell. And then you have macrophage, are these like cells that come and protect you from other pathogens in your connective tissue. You also have mast cell. This is to release histamine, which is to stimulate white blood cell and blood to come to that area. All right. And then you also have lymphocyte, has to do with immune system. So these are some of the it's not really, it doesn't make up a lot of the connective tissue. So that's why we're skipping a little fast. But again, I highly recommend you go back and read it, the know again. Macrophage is another cells in your connective tissue that protect you from pathogens. And then the last thing is melanocytes. These are cells that produce melanin. If you don't know what melanin is what makes your skin dark or light. The more melanin you have on your skin, the darker you are, right? The less melanin you have, the lighter you are. We'll talk about melanocyte and melanin when we get to the skin part, okay? So these are the cells that make up connective tissue. We're gonna focus on these two first. We're gonna talk more about these two, fibroblast and fibrocyte. Again, these are the cells that make up connective tissue, okay? Since we talk about fibroblast and fibrocyte, because their job is to produce fibers and collagen. If you guys still remember in the video, right? The guy have facial wasting, so they inject in fibers and collagen. Or some of you guys might have, especially the female student out there, right? You have creams that produce collagen and fiber. Or you eat food that has high collagen and fiber content. And why is they important? Well, because they build up your connective tissue, which to keep you looking young for a long time, right? Instead of wasting away, right? And what are the different type of fibers that we have in the connective tissue? And again, fibers are produced by fibrocytes, cell that produce fiber. And fibroblast is what kind of keep all these together. You have collagen fiber, which is collagen pretty much, reticular fiber and elastic fiber. So how are they different? Well, first of all, they are fibers. They keep your skin plump and healthy. And that's why all you young people out there, your skin is still plump and looking healthy. But as you get older, these fibrocytes, these cells that produce fiber will be less and less. And that's why people have to rely on creams and Botox and all that stuff to keep them looking young. Collagen fiber, what do they do? Well, I kind of highlight things for you. Their job is to be flexible and strong to hold your connective tissue together. They resist force in one direction. All right. For example, tendon and ligament contain a lot of collagen fiber, right? We know tendon connect your muscle to the bone. Ligament is bone to bone, right? And they have a lot of collagen because they're able to resist force in one direction. It's like, think of like like a band, like a rope. I pull one direction. Their job is to bring that rope back. Like think of rubber band. Pull one direction. When you let it go, it come back. And that's because of collagen fibers. Okay. The other fiber is reticular fibers. Their job is to resist force in many directions. So, I mean, they kind of all do the same thing, but specifically, reticular resists many force in many directions. So if I have a rubber band, I can pull this way, that way, and reticular fiber is what bring it back. You find them mostly around your organs, like liver and bone marrow, right? So that way you can't really stretch an organ, it will come back in any direction. Like round object have reticular fiber. And the last thing, elastic fiber, while the name kind of suggested, is elastic. It allows things to return back to stretch and return back to a normal shape. And again, these three fibers kind of combine together to make your body or your organ elastic, right? Like for example, our face, right? If we press on our face now, it doesn't, when we press it in, it doesn't just stay in the shape, it comes back to the normal shape. And that's because of fibers, collagen and fibers, okay? Keep in mind. And again, these are the cells that come together to make up your connective tissue. Connective tissue proper, and they are made of two types, loose and dense. And they still part of the connective tissue proper, the first category, all right? Loose connective tissue, again, example would be fat, right? Their job is to pack the body pretty much, to give the body the cushion. And that's why they loose, because they can move around. And the three types are areolar, adipose, and reticular in the adults. Areolars is an example of a loose connective tissue. Their job is to hold blood vessel and capillary bed. So their job is to, because your connective tissue contains your blood vessel, and areolar tissue is what hold the blood vessel together, and they are underneath your skin. Okay, so I'm gonna move that fast. And then of course, adipose tissue would be fat, right? So it's also an example of loose connective tissue. You have two types of fat, by the way. You have white and brown fat. I'm not sure you guys heard of that. Okay, so how are they different from each other? Well, white fat, okay, is the most common. So when we talk about white fat, we tend to think white fat. Their job is to store fat or store energy. Remember, fat is an extra carb that we don't use, extra energy we don't use. It absorbs shocks, it slow heat loss, insulation, and that's the function of white fat. We tend to think fat is just white fat, but actually there's a brown fat. So how's the difference between brown fat? Brown fat is a healthy fat, is a good fat, because they are vascularized. Vascularized means they have blood vessel running through them, and they're good. Their job is to absorb energy from surrounding tissue, so that way you have energy. And that's why when you go to the doctor, they tend to say good fat, bad fat. Bad fat is the white fat. Brown fat is a good fat. Okay, so keep that in mind. Always have the same amount of fat cell when you at an adult, because your body don't make up new fat cell anymore. They just become bigger or smaller. And that's how you gain weight or you lose weight. And the last type of loose connective tissue is what we call reticular tissue. This guy is technically found more in the organs. Okay. It also provides support for the organ like spleen, liver, lymph node, and bone marrow. So again, I highly recommend you go back and read this note, guys. It's a lot of information. Okay. All right, moving on to dense connective tissue. Remember, dense connective tissue and loose connective tissue is still part of the connective tissue proper, which is the first category. Okay. So hopefully you guys can kind of like space them out and understand they're still part of the connective tissue proper. So what are the dense connective tissue? They dense because they are tightly packed together. They're not like fat where they just loosely connect. These guys are dense, they're connected. You have three types as well. Number 3 is very important with connective tissue. 3 types: dense regular and dense irregular and elastic tissue. So are tightly packed and they are parallel. The fiber, collagen fiber are parallel. They're running parallel with each other. Example would be your tendons, and ligaments, right? And then aponeurosis, right? It's like a flat muscle. But anyway, tendon and ligament is a good example because look at it, they parallel, they regular because they tightly pack together like that, you see? And they are tendons, which is muscle to bone. Ligament mean bone to bone, all right? Irregular are more interwoven. They are not in a pattern like this. They are kind of like one going this way, one go the other way. And they are more around your bone and cartilage, all right? So that's the difference between dense, regular, and irregular. And again, they are still part of your connective tissue proper. And the last thing is, of course, elastic tissue. Elastic tissue or tissue that contain a lot of elastic fiber, and it's for for bouncing things, right? For things to absorb shock, right? And they tend to be found within your spinal cord. Your spinal cord has to hold all those weight, right? So it has to absorb the shocks, right? And that's your elastic tissue. And again, it's still part of your connective tissue proper. Okay, so hopefully you can go back. Everybody reply to this, a quick review to see if people still remember. What are the 3 types of loose connective tissue? Loose connective tissue, okay? And again, they are still part of your connective tissue proper. And again, I highly recommend you guys go back and read this note, please. It's a lot of information within 30-40 minutes. So read the note. You will need to know them. Okay. All right, moving on. All right, the second category of connective tissue. So we just finished proper tissue. The second category is fluid connective tissue. And they are well known for blood and lymph node. We'll talk about lymph later on, but think of blood. Blood is your fluid connective tissue, right? You have different type of blood elements, by the way. You have red blood cell, erythrocyte, white blood cell, leukocyte, and you have platelets. We'll talk about blood when we get to the circulatory system, okay? But right now, just know that it is part of your fluid connective tissue. And then the third category of connective tissue, the last one is what we call supporting connective tissue. Soft tissue and to support soft tissue and body weight. You have cartilage is your supporting connective tissue. And bone is your supporting connective tissue because their job is to support your body weight, right? Or soft tissue. Cartilage and bone. Chondrocyte, remember chondro has to do with cartilage. It's in your vocab list. Chondrocyte, right, is what make up your cartilage. And bone, we'll talk about that later. Speaking of cartilage, there are 3 types of cartilage in your body. And again, they are part of your supporting connective tissue. You have hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. So how are they different? Well, hyaline cartilage is stiff, flexible support. Their job is to reduce friction between bone. So you want to highlight, you highlight the friction between bone. So you tend to find them around bone-to-bone connection, right? That's their job, hyaline. And then the next thing is elastic cartilage, right? Like the name suggested, it allows bending. It contains an elastic cell. It's like your ear is elastic cartilage, you can bend around. Epiglottis, this is the flap that kind of like cover your eating and breathing tube, esophagus and trachea. That's your epiglottis, and that's made up elastic cartilage. And the last type of cartilage is called fibrocartilage. It limits movement, it prevents bone-to-bone contact. A patent knee joint, it fell between pubic bone and I think I lost his word, but it's limit movement. Its job is to kind of hold bone-to-bone in place, and it also allow to kind of separate your bone-to-bone contact because you don't want bone-to-bone to rub against each other. That creates a lot of pain. Especially older people, when they become older and older, they lose cartilage and they have pain when they move because bone-to-bone contact.